So chapter 10, let me just go ahead and, maybe somebody will join us and maybe not, but let me just go ahead and give you just like a real quick overview. Chapter 10 is about figuring out valuations. So when you make investments, how do you decide how much something is worth? When we say what is the value, basically that's synonymous with saying what's the selling price, or how much should I pay for it, or what should I sell it for? There's a real distinct difference between bonds and stocks, because bonds are always sold at or valued at, this is the technical definition, it's the present value of all future payments. The present value of future payments. And so that's going to be similar to the first three problems that we have at the end of the chapter, where it's asking you, so what will the bond sell for? And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to share my desktop screen with you.
Okay.
Let me just get this brought up here.
Oops.
Here we go. So what I'm going, let me find my share screen. I apologize.
No worries.
Here we go. So you should be able, can you see my desktop screen and you can see the time value of money calculator?
Yep, I can see it.
And that should be a familiar calculator. They're all the same.
Yep.
That's the one that I use, when I talk about other chapters. But when I say a bond sells for the present value of future payments, there's really two future payments that are associated with the bond. There's the interest that you make on the bond, and then there is the amount that you get back from the bond when it matures. So what we call the face value or principal of the bond.
Right.
So I'm just going to give a for instance kind of example. Let's just say that we have a bond and it has 10 years left to maturity. Basically, from reading the chapter that a bond is a loan. So instead of buying a share of stock in the company, you lend the company money. And let's say it's $1,000 bond. What that means is you're going to lend the company $1,000, and in 10 years, they're going to pay back the $1,000. So it's like an interest-only loan. When you buy a car or a house, you have to make payments that include, paying interest and paying back part of the loan, like all along. But a bond is really think of it as an interest-only loan. So what happens is you would lend a company like Apple or Disney, you would lend them, if you will, $1,000 for 10 years. In the course of that 10 years, they're just going to pay you interest. But at the end of the 10 years, when the bond matures, they will pay you that $1,000 back. So how much interest they're going to pay you, just to make life simple, let's just say 10% is the stated interest rate. And by stated, what that means is that's the rate that's part of the bond contract. So you tell Disney, we'll stick with Disney, I'll lend you $1,000 for 10 years. You're going to pay me 10% a year, every year for those 10 years. But then at the end of 10 years, you're going to give me my $1,000 back. Now, when a bond sells, the market interest rate and the stated interest rate, they're exactly the same. And when the market rate is equal to the stated rate, then the bond sells at face value. Okay. But what happens with interest rates over a course of 10 years, they go up, they go down, they go sideways, right? So what happens if all of a sudden the market rate goes up? So now instead of being 10%, market rate is, let's say, 13%. Now think about this for a second. You're holding a bond. You're the one that has invested money or loaned money to Disney. And Disney has agreed to pay you 10% for the next 10 years. But now here you are, and you're thinking, well, I really need my $1,000 back more than I need, this interest from Disney. So, I can't hang on to it. I want to sell it. Well, who's going to want to buy your bond? If you go out into the marketplace, and marketplace means you can ask your neighbors, your coworkers, your friends, hey, will you buy this bond from Disney? Give me $1,000, and for the next 10 years, you'll get 10% interest. Nobody's going to want to buy it because they're going to say, well, the market rate is 13%. Why should I buy your bond that's paying 10% if I can go in the market with $1,000 and make 13%? There's nothing that you can do about this. There's nothing you can do about the fact that the bond has a face value of $1,000. Nothing you can do about the fact that it's going to pay 10%. That's a contract that cannot be changed. What you can do is change the selling price of the bond. So what do you think you would have to do to inspire somebody to buy it? Do you think that they would buy it for more than 1,000 or less than 1,000?
Less than 1,000?
Absolutely. They're going to buy it for less. So when the market rate goes up, the value or the price of the bond goes down. It's an inverse relationship. So now if you look at this in a time value calculator, remember I said bonds sell for present value of all future payments. And there's two types of payments that a bond has. There's the yearly interest payments, and there's the when the loan gets paid back. When the loan gets paid back is the easy one. So you know that the face value of the loan is $1,000. And so I'm going to put that in here. It's $1,000 because that's the future value. In other words, when the bond matures or when it becomes due, it's $1,000. And that's going to happen in 10 years. I'm assuming that you are selling the bond right after you bought it, or right after you loaned Disney the money. Of course, it could be 9 years away, it could be 10 years away, whatever.
Okay.
And we are actually going to use the market rate here. The only time that we're going to use the stated rate, the only time we actually use the 10%, so that's what a big question comes in. How do I know to use the 10% or the 13%? The only time that you use stated rate is we use a stated rate only to compute the interest payment. So everything else is going to use the market rate. What we're trying to do is we're trying to say, so how much should this bond sell for based on the fact that the market rate's now 13%? So we're going to put 13% in there. The bond matures in 10 years, and that's it. It's not payments. It's a one-time thing. We're going to get that $1,000 back just once. Now that's here. And so we're going to say, so what is the present value of that? That is $294.59. So we know that is $294.59. And so when the loan gets paid back, we just valued that as $294.59. What we need to figure out is, okay, how about these interest payments? Remember I said we use this stated rate to compute the interest payment. So just a regular calculator here, not a time value one. If my bond is $1,000 and I get a 10% interest payment on that every year, I'm getting $100 a year interest payment. So I'm going to clear all this. And basically, now this is payment because I'm getting it a series of equal times. So I'm getting $100 a year every year. I'm going to get it for 10 years. And again, I'm going to use this 13% rate. Remember, the only time I use the stated rate is when I'm computing this $100. And so now I want to know, okay, what is the present value of that? And that's $542.62. So I'll come back to here, and it's $542.62. So if a bond sells for the present value of all future payments, it's going to sell for this plus this, the $542.62 plus the $294, plus the $294.59. And so now your $1,000 bond, in order to make someone inspired to be able to buy it, they would buy it for $837.21, which is of course less than the $1,000 that you paid for it, which is exactly what you said it would be. You said it would be less, and it is less. If the market rate goes up, then the value of the bond goes down. Does that make sense what I did?
Yeah, can we go back real quick to how you computed when you computed the interest rate? I get the part where it's $1,000 times the 10%, then that gets you $100.
Yes.
And then on the time value calculator,
Yes.
you input that.
So I'm going to erase everything out of here.
Okay.
So, and the time value calculator, so because I said a bond sells for the present value of future payments, what I have to figure out, what I'm computing with bonds, I'm always computing present value. I never have to compute future value payment, and I'm not computing it. If I'm asking the question, what does a bond sell for? The answer to what a bond sells for is the present value of future payments. So that means that's what I'm computing. So to figure out the interest piece of that, I know that the bond is a face value of $1,000 and the stated interest rate is 10%. And so if you loan Disney $1,000 and they paid you 10% a year, 10% of $1,000 is $100.
Right.
Are we good on that?
Yep. Good.
Okay. So that $100 becomes this goes into my time value calculator. This becomes my payment because the owner of the bond is the lender to Disney. I lent Disney $1,000. They're going to pay me or they're going to pay whoever's the owner of the bond, whoever's holding it, $100 every year until the bond matures, and then they have to pay the loan in full. So this is the $100, and because we still have the whole 10 years, I'm putting the 10 in periods, and this is of course set to annual. The interest rate is going to always be the market rate. The only time we use the stated rate is when we're computing that $100. That's the only time the stated rate gets used.
Got it.
And then that's all the information that I can put into my time value calculator. And now I'm going to say compute present value, that 542.64. That's where I got this number of the 542. I'm sorry, 542.62.
Okay, perfect. Got it.
Did that help?
Yes.
And if I start going off on a tangent, stop me. Like, wait.
All right. Yep, that makes sense.
So the first three questions in the homework are asking you, number one says, what's the market price of the bond? Number two says, what's the current value of the bond? And number three says, at what price should the bond sell? They're all the same question.
Okay.
So I'm going for price, what's the value, how much should it sell for? It's all asking the same question. And in every single one of these questions, you will have, if you look at the information given to you in the text, and each one of these, you're going to have, I don't know if you have the text in front of you, but if you look at the very first question, you've got your years to maturity, and that happens to be 6. And then the coupon rate of interest is 8%. Now the coupon rate means the stated rate. It's the rate that's on the coupon or on the paper. So you're always going to have two rates that are listed. One is going to be called like the stated rate or the coupon rate. We got lots of different words, but then you're also going to have the market rate, sometimes called the effective rate.
Okay.
And if you look again in number one, if you start looking at the paragraph, it says investors require a rate of return equal to 12% on this. So in other words, that's our market rate. That's if it says investors require that, what that means is that's what the market requires. That's what's kind of going on in the marketplace.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, that'll work.
So that's kind of the first half of the chapter. That talks a lot about how do you value bonds. Now bonds, and this is real life stuff. If you buy a bond, you don't become an owner in the company. You become a lender to the company, and you're going to get your money back. It's a guarantee, unless the company completely goes out of business. But if you buy a bond, what that means is you have lent the company money, and you're going to get that back. Now, if you buy stock in a company, that's a little bit different. There are no guarantees. You're not a lender to the company. You're now part owner of the company. We say who owns the company? The shareholders. That means when you buy shares, you become part owner of the company. And so the value of your stock, it can go up, it can go down, it just depends on a lot of factors. But there's never a point at which it matures. And there's a different process for valuing the how much a stock should sell for. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Have you gotten that far in the chapter? Do you want me to go ahead and talk about that a little bit, or do you want to like work on the bond stuff and connect back? What works best for you?
Yeah, I'd like to get into the shares part of it. That would be helpful.
Okay, hold on one second. And oops, apologies. Hold on one more second here. So we don't need the time value of money calculator for this. I'll go to here. Let me first talk about a couple of the problems, talk about preferred stock valuation and the difference between preferred stock and other types of stock, whether it's common stock, whether it's zero growth or constant growth, is preferred stock is like what I'm going to call a hybrid investment. And the reason why I'm calling it a hybrid investment is because I said when you buy a bond, you are lending the company money and you're guaranteed to get that money back and you're guaranteed to get those interest payments. That's why it's a contract that cannot be changed. Preferred stock, there's no guarantee. You're not lending the company money. You're not guaranteed you're going to get that stock back, the amount that you paid for that stock back. But what you are guaranteed is a dividend amount. Now, we don't call it interest because if we use the word interest, that would imply a loan. And buying a stock is not a loan. It's not it's not lending money to the company. But because because the company is going to give us a payment and that payment is guaranteed, that's why we call it a hybrid, because the payment looks a lot like dividend, it looks a lot like interest, but it's just called by another name, right?
Okay.
And so, kind of like the whole Shakespeare thing, a rose called by any other name would smell as sweet. So we call it a dividend, but it looks and acts a whole lot like an interest payment. So when we want to figure out the value or the selling price of a preferred stock, I believe where it talks about the value or the formula for a preferred stock is on page, this is what I was looking at when I was valuing stock, starts in the text on page 365 if you've got the 6th edition, just making sure of that. Yep. And basically it's and I believe it's 10-9, that's the graphic. And I'm just telling you that so you can mark it down and go back and reference it later. But I will tell you, you've got this big box in 10-9 that's got all these symbols and stuff. Let me tell you very, very simply, the price, which is the value of the stock, is very simply the annual dividend divided by the required rate of return. And that's how I write my formulas. I don't, if you look, I don't get into this, D subset 0, which basically into the first year, and the P with the little looking thing above it is the price. So, but very, very simply, if you're computing the price of the stock and it's a zero growth stock or a preferred stock, it is the price is equal to just the dividend divided by the required rate of return. Now, one thing I'm going to tell you, I talked about this in one of my other Zoom sessions. I don't think that you were in it. You might have been, but humor me for a minute if you were.
Sure.
All formulas are very simple, very simply A divided by B equals C. Every ratio that you could do is A divided by B equals C. Life is simple, and we love life when somebody gives us A and B, and then we got to compute C. Because all we do is we pull up the calculator, and we can do that, right? We can do A divided by B, and then we get C.
Right.
This formula here, this is my A, right? This is my B. A divided by B equals C. Sometimes life doesn't give us A and B. Sometimes life gives us A and C, and then we have to compute B. Or it gives us B and C, and we've got to compute A. If you have a challenge with that, what I tell students sometimes is that's really more of a math challenge than an accounting or finance challenge. And you probably saw this come up a lot when we did the chapter on ratios, that your variable is always moving. And so what I would tell you, if you're not real comfortable solving the A divided by B equals C, that's fine. But what you want to do is you want to check your work. Just take the extra 5 seconds and check your work. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. If I tell you that a stock is selling for $50, I'm going to purposely give you a variable that's not C. If I tell you that the stock is selling for $50 and it has a $2 dividend, and then I asked you, so what is the required rate of return? What you would do is you would take the information that you have, in the situation I just gave you out loud, or, in the problem in the textbook, and you would fill in your A, B, and C, as you can, and you've got your formula here. So, price, well, I know that, and I'm going to stick with that A divided by B equals C formatting. So if my A is dividend, I know my dividend is 2, and B is the required rate of return. So that's what I'm looking for, required rate of return. And I know this equals $50. And so now I have to solve for, so what is the required rate of return? I apologize in advance if I'm insulting your intelligence, because I certainly do not mean to. Lots of people are really, really great at math, and some people struggle and they just don't want to ask the question out loud, okay? Right. So since what we are trying to solve for is in the denominator, the way that we are actually going to solve for that is we are going to divide, basically, we're going to take that 50, we're going to take our C and divide it by the 2. And that's going to give us 20, am I saying this right? Sometimes I can't talk and think at the same time. Hold on. No. Oh, I am. I apologize. I'm talking backwards is what I'm doing. And you know what my problem is? I can't, I need my lines written straight across versus on slants. I do apologize. So 2 divided by what equals 50. And so I'm trying to solve for what is my required rate of return. And so what I was getting ready to show you was the common mistake. So what a lot of students will actually do is they'll take the 50 and they'll divide it by 2, and then they'll submit it and they'll say, okay, the answer is 25. What I want you to do, though, is take your answer of 25, and I'm going to tell you up front, it's wrong. How do I know it's wrong? Because if you try to check your work, 2 divided by 25, does it equal 50?
Right.
And if 2 divided by 25, if it's not equal, it does not. And so, hold on 1 second.
Yep.
So you can see this.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. So what I was saying is what a lot of students will do is they'll take the 50 divided by the 2 and compute the required rate of return. But I always tell students, make sure that you plug it back in and make sure that it works. What you should be doing here is taking your 2 and dividing it by 50, and that's going to equal 0.04. And again, I'm going to recommend that you go back and check your work. And so you look and you say 2 divided by 0.04, does that equal 50? And it does. And required rate of return is always a percentage. So what you would do to answer that question is to convert any decimal to a percentage. Of course, you would just multiply it by 100. And so that's 4%. What this is basically telling you is that if there is a stock out there, let's say Apple, and Apple's giving dividends of $2 a share every year, and investors require a rate of return of 4%, then that stock is going to have a selling price of $50. Now, sometimes in the questions, you're going to be asked to compute the selling price, but that's when you get the A divided by B and you're computing C. And what I was trying to show you here is sometimes you get a variable that is somewhere else. It's not, you're not always solving for C. You know, sometimes,
right.
like in this case, you get A and C, you got to solve for B.
Yep.
So that's the formula, you know, the dividend divided by the required rate of return. That's the formula that you're going to use for solving number 6 and 7 of the homework, because that's the preferred stock valuation.
That's pretty straightforward.
It is. It's very straightforward. When you get into the number 8, when you have a constant growth stock valuation, it talks about your constant growth stock valuation on page, I believe it is 371. So we have constant growth stock valuation. And since it's only me and you, or you and I, if I'm going to be correct with my English, if you'd like, what I can do, Liz, is after we get off of this chat, I'd be happy to send you this document that I'm typing.
Yeah, that'd be
I
great.
think it would have any
value
at all. I'm just jotting down your last name so I can find you easy when we hang up. So what you have on 371 is the formula as the textbook has written it, for finding the value for a stock that has a constant growth. And it's talking about, in the way it's listed here is computing the expected rate of return equals the dividend plus the growth. There is another way that you can write if you're actually solving for the price, because you notice what you're solving for on page 371, it's actually, you would use that formula when you're trying to solve for not what's the price of the stock or the value of the stock, but what's the expected rate of return. And so what it's telling you on page 371 is the expected rate of return is equal to the dividend divided by price, that whole thing, dividend divided by price plus growth. And so on page 372, it actually has the same formula, but it rearranges it a little bit for you. And on page 372, it's basically saying, okay, what is the price of the stock? And that's like what we have been solving for. And it says here that it's equal to the dividend divided by, and then we have a subtraction in our denominator. It's the required rate of return minus growth. So the question is, which one of these two formulas should you use? The reality is they're both exactly the same. The one that you should use depends on what you're trying to solve for and what would be a little bit easier for you to plug your numbers into.
Gotcha.
Yep. So your question, I can tell you that your question number 8 in your textbook, because it's very specifically asking you in question number 8, it says, what is the value of the stock today? So it just depends on your level. What's the value of the stock today? I don't know that you would necessarily want to solve for price here, right in the middle of this formula here. You would want to go ahead and plug in the pieces of the puzzle
Gotcha.
you have to solve for price there. But if a question was asking you about the expected rate of not asking you just, it depends on what it's asking you to solve for, I guess, is the long and short of what I'm trying to get. But
Right.
what I want to point out is that there is more than one way to write the formula, and the textbook even shows that to you. It just rearranges it so that you can put all the variables into the equation in a way that'll make the math a little bit less intimidating and not so overwhelming to share,
Right.
to solve. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
And then, I know I'm just talking, but I want to make sure that I'm giving you information to be able to navigate through the questions that are assigned. And then, like I said, 12, 13, and 14 really aren't any different than 1, 2, 3, or 6, 7, 8. Because again, if you look, 12 is again about the constant growth dividend, constant growth stock dividend. And this is an introductory finance course, so we don't get into variable growth dividend. If you want to take an advanced finance class, we can certainly get into that. There's a couple formulas we have to use. So it would be, you know, you have to do this formula for these variable years of growth, and then a different formula for when it levels out, and then you have to add the pieces together. This being an introductory finance class, we basically say, the stock has growth or it doesn't. And if it does have growth, it's constant, which means it's a very specific percentage. It's a very specific, it's not going to be like, well, it's going to be 10% the first year and 4% the next year and then 3%. We don't get into that in this class.
Right.
So,
Fair enough.
I know you're disappointed.
And
then that's in 12, 13, 14. 13 is back to bond valuation, and then 14 again is a stock valuation. Once again.